Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today we're going to be screening a 1965 film from China, Stage Sisters, directed by Xie Jin. This is one of those films that is legendary in its quality, but was kept away from us for many years for obviously the reasons of the Cultural Revolution and of the politics between the United States and China. In recent years, we've been discovering a number of the riches of Chinese cinema before the emergence of the fifth generation in the 1980s. And this is one of those remarkable works. It's a women's melodrama. It's also an example in a number of ways of Chinese socialist realism. It's a beautifully crafted and acted work, and it raises a whole set of questions about ideology, filmmaking, and Chinese culture. We'll be talking about that and a number of other things after today's screening. It's a pleasure to welcome as our guest Professor Ban Wang from SUNY Stony Brook, an expert on Chinese cinema. Now, take this opportunity to see the visually ravishing Stage Sisters. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this rare opportunity to have a glimpse of first-rate, world-class filmmaking, but from a particular perspective, from a particular moment in history. China, 1965, looking back. Today, there's a lot of things to talk about that, and today joining us, it's a pleasure to have with us here at CUNY TV, Professor Ban Wang from the Department of Comparative Literature at SUNY Stony Brook. Ban teaches Chinese literature, film, cultural studies, and
aesthetics.
Aesthetics. Welcome to City Cinematheque, Ban.
Thanks. Yeah.
One good place for us to perhaps start our conversation is, in fact, the very first scene or so of the film and the way it opens the set of issues in the film. This is the scene, I'm thinking of the scene in which the young woman flees her in-laws. Why start the film that way, and what does it introduce that's going to be so crucial to the film?
The director, Xie Jin, is not the first one who started that sort of a scene. He's not alone in staging the scene of the scene of fleeing and escape. I would say the whole Chinese modern culture hinges on that scene of young women forced into some kind of a marriage as a child bride and discontented with the oppressive atmosphere of her family. She has to work as a servant, serving the in-laws, and she has no place in the family. And she wants to run away, to break out the wedlock. It's really a lock here.
Right.
Yeah.
Emphasis on lock, not wed.
They're not wed, yeah. Many modern Chinese writers actually love to start with this scene in their literature, in their literary works, because it's inspired by Nora in Ibsen's play, Doll's House. And so they start, the whole Chinese modern culture, this whole mentality of rebellion starts with a young woman running away from her in-laws, from her wedlock. And of course, there is a problem of what is she going to do after she runs away, after she's out there in the open, in the whole wide world. And of course, this film, in fact, provides a solution to her fate, to her destiny when she's out there in the world. She finds a place, finally, right? Not just in the theater, but also in the revolutionary ranks, if you like.
Absolutely. And this is, it's very interesting because this is also a pattern. It's interesting to compare this with a similar pattern in American cinema because there is a tradition that goes back at least as far as something like It Happened One Night by Frank Capra, in which a young woman rejects a kind of marriage, and then the movement or the trajectory of the work is for her to find her appropriate role. But usually, in the conventions of romantic comedy that are American, that means finding the right mate. That is, rejecting the wrong husband, rejecting perhaps the wrong class affiliation, but finding a more democratic and more dynamic heterosexual mate in some way. And that, I think, is a very interesting, because that pattern is repeated from, you know, It Happened One Night all the way through something like Romancing the Stone or
That's right.
et cetera. But it's very interesting to contrast that with what the solution is proposed to be in something, in Stage Sisters or other Chinese works.
And contrast that with what is really behind the quintessential plot line, which is a mirror of historical development. This film is not really about two sisters or a bunch of sisters working together or trying to get organized. It's an image of how Chinese Revolution is advancing through all those years of struggles, of trials and errors. Xie Jin, one thing to notice about this film is that Xie Jin likes to use women as images of his films. In most of his films, he cast women as the main characters, as the characters that advanced the plot, push forward the story development. And the question we can ask about this kind of a beginning is that why women? Because the whole Chinese Revolution was initiated, I would guess, initiated by mostly men. Yeah. Why do we have image of women up front as a picture or as an allegory of the Chinese Revolution?
Well, that's, if I can stop you just for a second, because I want to continue that line, but you've introduced, I think, this key word, which is one of the things that points to this contrast, and that is of allegory. That is, the women are being used in some way so that the spectator, whether Chinese or American watching today, will read through them to a narrative of history. And because allegory always has those two levels, and you are not properly reading it unless you've moved through the first level to the second level. Whereas in the American kind of example I was given, it is not making the claim, first of all, about really being historical narratives. Generally they don't make that claim. And second of all, they're not structured allegorically. We really stay at that level of engagement with the characters as characters with their qualities, not having to read them as representative of something.
Yes, I like the idea of looking through, because the women in Hollywood films seem to be object to be looked at. They have this look-atness, to use the very, very high-sounding academic term, look-atness, being look-atness. But in Chinese film, the women are being looked through, as you put it. It's very interesting. They are like a looking glass, a window pane through which you look at what is really going, bigger scene behind them. But I would say that it's still worthwhile to look at them as opaque pictures that block your vision, because they are presented as women.
Yes, indeed.
They are flesh and body, right? Flesh and blood in women.
Right.
So I would still, maybe we can still talk about them as women in the films, and as to how they transform from women status to a more neutral or more male role. That's the matter of whole development of the story. Okay.
Well, to me, it's one of the features that's interesting about this is that as we look at the film and as they become more revolutionary, they become less women, and very specifically, I think, they become de-eroticized.
De-eroticized. Exactly.
Because the narrative begins with putting the theme of women as sexual objects who are being used and abused by this patriarchal culture. But in fact, in the movement of the narrative, what we do not have is some form of sexual liberation or a reconfiguration of their sexuality into a more appropriate. We in fact seem to have a loss of that sexuality that also is a loss partially of their individuality as they are absorbed in the collective of the revolution.
Exactly. The sexuality here is actually being used. I think when you use it, I understand it to be a very broad category,
Right.
like the actresses and as sisters to each other, they have sexual appeal because they are depicted as very, very appealing, very attractive, even alluring.
Absolutely.
To the male spectators. But the turning point is when they have been absorbed. They are absorbed into, not, I shouldn't say they, referring to two sisters on the stage. I refer to the whole group of
Right.
female actresses in this Shaoxing opera, because Shaoxing opera, unlike Peking opera, has all actresses
Okay.
as the players. They don't use men as actors in the drama. In the one of the sisters play boy's role.
Right.
Right. You had the reversal here, as opposed to the Peking opera. Peking opera may play a female role. So here, this young woman, Chun Hua, spring flower, Chun Hua, is recruited by this woman working as a journalist to participate in the kind of revolutionary art.
Right.
Yeah. So that is the turning point of her career. And I would say that is also a point from which she's becoming more and more de-eroticized.
That's right.
Yeah, because she's first introduced to the paintings, revolutionary paintings, and woodcut by this modern Chinese writer Lu Xun.
Right.
No, it's the woodcut from the character
Right.
Of Lu Xun, New Year's Sacrifice, and she's very much fascinated by the whole field of misery that surrounds this portrait, and at that point she sees, as she looks at the portrait, she sees overlap or imposed on an image, other images, images of that smaller girl, the servant, also a child bride, right? Her friend, a child bride who has the same name that she has, Chun Hua, and also she sees herself,
right,
in the picture. So there is this sense that they're all sisters suffering the same fate. As one of the songs says that they are bitter melons and leaves sharing the same roots. So here you have sort of a mirror recognition of herself and all the Chinese women as sisters, suffering sisters. Yet, from then on, she starts taking on the role of a revolutionary artist.
Indeed.
She's no longer a mere actress playing the traditional melodrama, traditional love story, because she has been playing a love story with her sister Yue Hong in the traditional melodrama.
Well, one of the things that's very interesting to me about this moment in the narrative you're describing is that it's a scene and a sequence of scenes at that particular moment in which the director uses strategies of redundancy, because at that moment it is the moment of conversion, and it must not only be the conversion of this character into a revolutionary artist, but it must also be an explanation to the audience of why this is necessary. So what's interesting is that in many ways in modern cinema, some of the things that have been most valued are exactly the opposite of that: ambiguity, a sense of a displacement of characters. Well, this is the opposite, because first there are three things used. We have her self-revelation of her reflecting upon it. We have commentary in the song within the section, as well as we then have, for the first time, explicit mentor about ideology that comes from the journalist. And so you have this stream of 3 different ways of narrating the conversion process, so that if you, as it were, if you miss one way of understanding the conversion, if you miss the explicitly ideological, you get it through the psychological. If you miss it through the psychological, you get it through the choral effect of the song as well. And I think for many people, that's, first of all, people would say, well, it's propagandistic. Well, of course it is, because it is, this is how didactic narratives work. They must assure conversion to a particular point of view and use their strategies in doing so. What's interesting is, to me, is that before that point, when the journalist speaks, all of the movement towards conversion has been really handled, how shall I put it, by less explicit means.
Yes.
We've been watching the characters pass through the historical experience, then they come, or this young woman comes to the crucial moment, and the mentor must be there to guide her into her proper role in history.
Yeah. So there is a period of spontaneity.
Yes.
The woman is, Chunhua is depicted as a perfect candidate. She's not yet a communist, she's not yet a revolutionary, but she possessed all the qualities that will make her a perfect revolutionary. So she's presented as a candidate, and this is a typical strategy, filmic strategy in the revolutionary films. The films start with a young woman, usually a young woman or a very, very young adolescent, who possesses this courage, who has this sympathy for the suffering people, who is bold to stick his neck out, to do all kinds of things, to be a leader, to be an organizer, to be a fighter, protester. And then he or she will be discovered by a mentor and put on the right track. And the mentor will educate him or her, will raise his consciousness, and will move her in the right, more organized, more self-conscious, reflective political direction. What is interesting about this mentor as journalist is that she's also a woman.
Yes, indeed.
And in most of the revolutionary films of the same period, that is the late 50s and early 60s, you have a mentor as a man. Usually it's a party secretary or an underground party worker. If the mentor is a woman, she must have somebody behind her. What is interesting about this film is that there is somebody behind her who is a man. This man seems to look dignified. He looks dignified, authoritative, but we only see him twice. At one point, it's in the theater. He's looking at the play, the drama that's staged by this woman. It's this New Year's sacrifice. He seemed to be approving of the performance. And another time is towards the end of the story when he's with this journalist. They turn out to be officers in the army, and they're sending her off to the country to do the propaganda work as part of the land reform movement. So it turns out that there is a man, but we never know what he's up to. Is he directing the whole show, or is simply a woman? I think his role is quite ambiguous at this point, but we are quite sure that up front we have women as the images, and they are quite striking. I mean,
this then comes back to a question we always perhaps come back to when we're talking about films that make an explicit claim to represent history, and that is how do we match this with the history we would now write? That is this, to what degree does this idealize a hope for the place that women will have in the revolution, and to what degree is it an accurate view of the place that women had in the revolution in the 50s?
This is a very, very good question, because the film seemed to be very, very intent on depicting women rescuing themselves.
Yes.
You have these elements of women rescuing themselves repeated over and over and over in the film. The first is this young woman is running away from her family, and she hides herself in the trunk, and she's rescued by this another woman, her sister, is Yue Hong.
Right.
And when the local bully, this little patriarchal person, wealthy person, tried to get Yue Hong, tried to get her as mistress, and Chunhua helps her run away.
Right.
And she's arrested, and she's put in a public display to be humiliated. And she's helped by this another woman, this young servant, who offered water to her so that she would not die of exhaustion, dehydration. And then, of course, she's released by her sister. Towards the middle of the story, you have this young woman, Chunhua, trying to help this star actress, because she's treated badly by the manager, and she's trying to do justice to her, try to get her a fair treatment when she's
really being thrown away
and commit suicide. Right? She's trying to protest, right, on behalf of this mistreated young man. The best moment of women rescuing women comes in the end of the story, when this young woman, Yue Hong, is pushed by her husband to testify in the court. She was asked to say that I'm the one who instigated the whole criminal act of hurting my sister, because we just don't like each other.
Right.
We just break up, right? But she doesn't say that, right? It's the other woman who tries very hard to defend her and destroy the whole conspiracy. So this is the last moment. So you have the whole element of women rescuing women on their own. It's important thing to notice. They do it on their own, on their just sort of a female bonding, without political implication at the time.
Right.
Yet, right. So it gets repeated. Yet, this woman's work, and the women rescuing would not work unless it is guided properly by someone like a journalist.
Right. Well, that's also one of the things I think that can be a little bit grating or even confusing to North American audiences that are not used to these narrative patterns, because there's a phrase a critic used a number of years ago, actually in regard to some other novels from another country, but characters that are walking paragons. That is, characters that are not defined by their psychological traits, but are defined by their social or, explicitly in the case of mentoring characters, their ideological traits. And there's really no effort made to give a profile to the mentor as a personality, aside from the fact that she embodies a certain kind of forward-looking revolutionary wisdom. Now let's locate this particular politics of the film in the time in which this film is made. Because this film portrays the era 36 to 50, but it's made in 1965.
64, 65.
Right.
I think, yeah.
What's the situation in Chinese filmmaking and its, the kind of its needs to portray the revolution at that moment in the mid-60s?
It's good to look at the films made slightly before 1964 and 65, because that was very, very close to the outbreak of the Cultural Revolution.
Exactly.
Before that, you have the national disaster. You have China having a difficult time, and the films made before that seem to be sort of low key, more ambiguous, and the political messages do not quite get through. So it's more of a great area before that. You can think about these early spring films like those. But as we advance to the middle of the decade, 64, there was an increasing emphasis on the politicization of art. I think Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, was very much behind the whole drive to turn art, to turn literature into a handmaiden of politics, and she has given a lot of sort of orders and decrees, directives, things like that. She had a lot of meetings pushing artists to work on that project. So there is intensification of politics in art at the time. Yet that the process of politicization has not come to a high gear that you see in the Cultural Revolution. So there's still kind of a gray areas in this film. But definitely the whole career choice of this woman, Chunhua, mirrors the intensification of politics in art and in artist life.
Well, as always, there's this double time level that it's portraying an historical period, making a claim about that, but also proposing what one should be doing in the present moment as well. That just as she, back then, converted in this particular way, so you today should follow this kind of path and use her, and it's quite explicit, use her dedication as a model.
Yes, and what is also interesting is that the art, and in this process, art and literature became more and more important in the daily life of the audience, of the population. So there is kind of a mixture of art and politics, and you don't know where you can draw the line between the two. I would call it a sort of an aestheticization of everyday life. It seems that life imitating art, and art imitating life at the same time. So there's really a kind of a blurring mixture of two realms of experience here. So seeing the film for the Chinese audience at the time is not really like entertainment. It's both entertainment, but it's smuggled in a political message at the same time. Right.
We've only got a minute or so left. So why don't Ban, if you don't mind, summarize for us a little bit more about Xie Jin's career. I mean, he's someone who begins before, so it's before, what are his films like, in just a word or so, before, during the Cultural Revolution, and then after?
I like to speak about his films as a trajectory of his career, right? He
got about 1 minute.
He started with classical communist films like Red Battalion of Women, and is tremendously propagandist, even though you have wonderful images of vibrant women. And in 1980s, his career marked a dramatic change. He started looking at the trauma of history. He tried to represent the Cultural Revolution and the political victimization.
And what are the titles? That's all we have left. What are those films from the 80s?
80s, his biggest town is the most well-known one, and another one is the Legend of Tianyuan Mountain, and there's a third one.
The Herdsman. I'm going to have to stop you here. We've run out of time.
Okay.
If you'd like more information about City Cinematheque, drop us a line. Drop it to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 25 West 43rd Street, Suite 1220, New York, New York, 10036. Let me give you that information again. City Cinematheque, City University Television, 25 West 43rd Street, Suite 1220, New York, New York, 10036. Ban, you leave us with tantalizing ideas about other films we should look at so we can understand the work of a master craftsman like this better. Thanks for joining us, and I look forward to having you back on City University.
Thank you for giving me this great opportunity to talk about Chinese film.
Okay, well, our pleasure. And we hope that you continue gaining pleasure from the films we're going to be showing in the coming weeks on City Cinematheque. Thanks for joining us here today. Bye-bye.